Hello and welcome back to F1 Every Week. I am your host Ben Wevell, and today I'm going to be beginning a hopefully monthly series which will traverse the stories behind some of the greatest incidents and controversies that have ever beset our great sport. You can listen to the podcast on a range of streaming services, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Now, without further ado, welcome to F1 Folklore, Crashgate, and episode 51. Let's set the scene. It's late September 2008, under the floodlights of Marina Bay, Singapore. The first night race in F1 history and round 15 of the Formula One World Championship that year. It's lap 14, and Nelson Piquet Jr., son of the infamous three-time world champion Nelson Piquet, and driving for the Renault F1 team, has just made a rookie mistake, crashing out of the Grand Prix at turn 17 and bringing out the safety car. His Renault teammate Fernando Alonso has gambled with an early pit stop, and the safety car led everyone to stream into the pits, leaving Alonso with clean air to cruise to his first victory in over a year, and the team's first victory since Alonso's championship-winning year of 2006. It all seems pretty simple, but what seemed like a fluke win at the time will soon be uncovered as a desperate ploy by Renault's upper management to rekindle some of the glory of years past. But before we delve into the aftermath, let's take it back to the beginning, and a familiar face, Fernando Alonso. The Spanish driver had been in the sport since 2001, starting off with the Minardi team before making the jump to Renault for 2002 as a test and reserve driver, getting his first taste of victory with the team a year later at the 2003 Hungarian Grand Prix. Fernando would take the team to new heights in the 05 and 06 seasons, becoming a double world champion, only missing out on the podium in 8 of the 37 races in that period, which was enough to give the Renault team 2 Constructors' Championships as well. But the Spaniard made the decision to switch to McLaren for 2007, accompanied by rookie Lewis Hamilton, and it certainly wasn't the cakewalk that some were expecting, as Lewis pulled out one of the greatest rookie seasons in F1 history, edging out his teammate on a technicality and missing out on the championship by a single point. Though both drivers were off by the same margin, Alonso will have felt disappointed that he was within touching distance of his third world championship and was also technically bested by his rookie teammate. But how did the 2007 season go for Renault? Well, hot off championship-winning form, the R27 was only able to secure 1 podium all season, dropping to 3rd in the Constructors' Championship, so they needed to really go the extra mile to make 2008 an improvement. The plan was simple. Throw money at a disgruntled Fernando Alonso and persuade him to return, pairing him with the blood of F1 royalty in Nelson Piquet Jr. But this return to glory didn't start well. The rookie had as many retirements as he did finishes, and the team were languishing in 5th in the Constructors' Championship, tied on points with Toyota, and they had only had 1 trip to the podium so far that season, with rookie Piquet in Germany. Both Renault teammates were outside the top 5 in the Drivers' Championship when the F1 circus came to Singapore, and with BMW comfortably ahead, it seemed to be almost at curtains on the season already for the team. But a couple of strong performances from Alonso could propel him into the top 5, ahead of one of the Sauber drivers, Nick Heidfeld or Robert Kubica. The stage is now set for the Grand Prix, the implications of success for Fernando looming over us all, and the meticulously planned drama resulting in one of the most storied races in F1 history. Alonso had been running well all weekend, setting the fastest time in the final 2 practice sessions prior to qualifying on the 27th of September. Alonso seemed on for third row finish at worst, but he was unfortunately denied an opportunity to progress further than Q1, a mechanical failure sending him to the back of the grid, alongside teammate Piquet Jr. The race began and Alonso remained near the rear of the grid, opting for a very aggressive strategy, one that may have been akin to a driver with podium hopes, but not one fighting for scraps. He pitted at a ludicrously early lap 12, going for the two-stopper. What was especially odd was that he was only fuelled for around 14 laps, seemingly quite a precise gamble. It was later claimed by the team that they did not believe that the track could handle a one-stop strategy, as they claimed not enough overtakes could be made for the one-stop to be a viable option. Furthermore, the technical engineers backed this claim up, expressing that the brakes were unable to manage a one-stop, the fuel load being too great for the wishbones to take. Only 2 laps later, Nelson Piquet Jr. crashed at turn 17, a very difficult area to remove debris from, which meant a long safety car was about to ensue. Robert Kubica and Nico Rosberg, the early leaders, had started with little fuel. Their plan to pit relatively early, but not as early as lap 14. They were forced to pit for fuel, or they would have run out and come to a standstill on the track, but refuelling was illegal under the safety car until notice was given under Article 40.6 of the FIA sporting regulations. They were both awarded 10-second time penalties for this, which aided Alonso later in the race, when they were forced to serve these penalties. Once the pit lane was open, most drivers who had just completed their first stint poured into the box, which aided Alonso greatly, as he had of course pitted prior to the safety car had been deployed. The only 3 cars who had similar strategies being the 2 Red Bulls and a Honda. Fernando effectively had clean air, and his position was further aided by a catastrophe in the pit lane for Felipe Massa, who was prematurely released from his pit stop while the fuel hose was still attached to his car. He narrowly avoided contact with Adrian Sutill's Force India and was forced to travel the whole length of the pit lane before coming to a halt, so that the Ferrari mechanics could remove the hose. However, by the time Massa had left the pit lane, he was in dead last, and his race was pretty much over. And after Rosberg and Kubica served their penalties, Fernando was left with the win in his hands, served on a golden platter. The podium was completed by Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton, who benefited from late mechanical failures. When most think of infamous races, they are often ones that are talked about for years to come, but after the Singapore Grand Prix, F1 just got back to racing and moved on, the season coming to a close. Alonso ended up finishing P5 in the standings, taking another victory at the following race at Fuji, along with another podium at the final race in Brazil. It would be another year before more questions were asked about the dark September night in Singapore. And the first ready to spill the beans was not an inconspicuous insider, but Nelson Piquet Jr. himself, after he was dropped by Renault after the 2009 Hungarian Grand Prix. Let's remind ourselves of the finale to the Brazilian Grand Prix of 2008. Felipe Massa cruised home to a dominant victory at his home Grand Prix, which seemed to put the Drivers' World Championship out of reach of Lewis Hamilton. But of course, is that Glock, and Hamilton took the driver's title by 1 point. Now, Felipe felt that the crash at the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix had cost him the title that he believed should have been his, as chaos in the pit lane would not have ensued had Felipe not needed to come in at that time. It sounds a little convoluted to me, but I do not fight for Formula One World Championships that go down to the final lap. My job is to keep journalistic neutrality. But regardless of my opinion, Felipe began querying the incident, but FIA president at the time, Max Mosley, was having none of it, as there was no real evidence of any wrongdoing by either team or driver. So the 2009 season began, and very poorly for Nelson Piquet Jr., who never even scored a point and was only on a 1-year contract, which should tell one something about the confidence Renault had in his ability, i.e. slim to none. By the time Piquet was dropped on the 26th of July in favour of Romain Grosjean, it was clear that Alonso wasn't having the best season either, with only 13 points on the board by the third round of the season, with a best finish of P5 at Spain and Australia. A week after Piquet Jr. was fired from Renault, he went directly to the FIA, claiming that team principal Flavio Briatore and executive director of engineering Pat Symonds had coerced him into crashing on lap 14 of the Singapore Grand Prix of 2008, so as to give his teammate Alonso the advantage. But before we continue, who were these two? Flavio Briatore had been in business from a young age, working at the Italian Stock Exchange from 1979, before being acquainted with Luciano Benetton, head of the eponymous Italian fashion brand Benetton. Whilst a fugitive in the US, avoiding charges of fraud, he set up multiple Benetton stores and was made head of Benetton's American operations. This led to a boom in the company's popularity, which winded up in the Italian, who had now become very wealthy from his operations in the States, joining Benetton F1 team. After being appointed managing director a short time later, he set about building the team into championship contenders, persuading youngster Michael Schumacher to join the team in the latter half of the 1991 season. The young German then unaware of the behemoth that he and the team would become in the mid-90s. Around the same time as Schumacher's rise to the pinnacle of F1, Pat Symonds had reached the highest technical ranks within the Benetton team, acting as Michael's race engineer for both of his championship-winning seasons, and being promoted to technical director after Ross Brawn made the switch to Ferrari with Schumacher in 1996. Fast forward a decade, and Benetton was now Renault, with the outfit having just won back-to-back titles. 2 years later, the team is desperate even to get on the podium. Getting back to the story, it was not just the lap that had been chosen specifically, but turn 17 itself was picked, specifically because it was incredibly difficult to remove a car from the racetrack in that area, and that a lengthy safety car was likely to follow. This story was leaked by the Brazilian media a month after the initial claim made by Piquet Jr., the broadcast laying out the claim that Nelson had been ordered to crash at the Singapore Grand Prix of the year before. The FIA assured that they were looking into quote-unquote alleged incidents at a previous F1 event, but the extensive media coverage resulted in many declaring that the 2008 Singapore Grand Prix was the event in question. On the 4th of September, after less than a week of speculation, the FIA formally accused Pat Symonds, Flavio Briatore, Nelson Piquet Jr. and the Renault team of wrongdoing, citing that they were in violation of Article 151C of the International Sporting Code. The World Motorsport Council planned to decide the fate of the Renault F1 team and the perpetrators within on the 21st of September in Paris. But before they could get there, Nelson Piquet shared his second statement about the incident with the FIA. On the same day, a transcript of his first statement was made public. FIA president at the time, Max Mosley, admitting that it was not a forged document. This transcript shared his full side of the story to the public, that Briatore and Symonds had ordered him to crash at turn 17 specifically. This was all seemingly unbeknownst to Alonso, who claimed that he had no idea of the crash being a ruse, and that it had never entered his mind. But it was somewhat suspicious that he did not question at all the very aggressive strategy, one that Piquet Jr. described as senseless. Despite some conspiracy theories, Alonso was cleared of any nefarious intent. A day after the leaks, Renault planned to take legal action against Nelson Piquet Jr. and his father for the quote-unquote making of false allegations and a related attempt to blackmail the team into allowing Mr. Piquet Jr. to drive for the remainder of the 2009 season. Piquet Jr., though, seemed unfazed by these new allegations, assuring that he will not be bullied into making a